Hey everybody, and welcome back to Vestanland. This is episode 12, and in this episode I build a massive central park for the city of Nyrstad. And this park takes up a huge area in the center of the city and frames this lake that I had sort of put in the initial map with the idea of building a park around it, so it's really cool to get to that at this point in the series. The first thing I did was I sort of stretched out some roads and just tried with the idea of just kind of framing the area that I was going to be building in, and also just adding some infrastructure so that I could sort of get a sense of the area that I was dealing with. And once I did that, I cleared away the trees from inside that sort of border that I had made, and filled it back up with sort of a denser forest, just because I wanted this to be a lot more realistic, and I wanted it to be distinct from the areas around it. It looks like this has been like a sort of a green oasis within the developed city, which is sort of true of a lot of parks in real life in terms of how they function within cities. I wanted it to really look like that, so that's why I added a lot more trees. In terms of, just go back on the theme of adding some infrastructure, I added this pedestrian quay to this area on the sort of south side of the lake, and I'll get back to that later on in the episode. But before I do that, I moved back to the other side of the lake, closer to where the sort of more forested area was, and I put in this sort of rustic-looking bridge, and afterwards I used some Terra networks to sort of put down a really narrow channel with the idea of building a creek in this little area. And you'll see that my initial plan was to use like real life water. If anyone who's actually played this game will know that doing this and trying to make a really narrow stream with the water mechanics in the game is really difficult. And I knew that, but I was going to try to press my luck anyway. But at the end of the day, it didn't work. So I ended up just sort of trying to build this whole thing with props and procedural objects, which I think actually works out pretty well in the end. You can see I've deleted the water source, and now it's just a dry channel. And I'm using these mossy rocks to sort of make it even more narrow than the narrowest Terra network would allow me to make it. And these are great for building nature scenes like this. These rocks, the textures are really nice, and it's easy to move them around and create the shapes that you want to see. Speaking of great assets, this is another one, this animated waterfall prop. It's super useful, and you can have, as you can see, I've converted it to procedural objects, and which allows you to stretch it out, and it still retains its animation, which is really cool. And yeah, you can see once the game is unpaused, it looks like it actually has water flowing through this channel, which is exactly what I wanted in the beginning, so it was really cool to see that come to life. I also ended up copying over some trees and kind of siding them up right to the edge, just to give the illusion that this was a really narrow waterway, even though there's actually no real water flowing through it. I continue to add more and more procedural object waterfalls and sort of vary the size of them, so just to limit the repetition. And you'll see I'll sort of obscure some of those repetitive lines in the future with some rocks. But before I do that, I knew that this was going to sort of culminate in an actual waterfall falling into this lake, which I figure would be a really cool contrast to sort of the developed city on the other side of the water, to have this kind of really impressive natural waterfall here. I can imagine this would be like a really cool hike, even like you can like access even if you live in the middle of the city, which is a really cool concept to me. You can see I'm adding some more rocks, more trees, just making this a really sort of almost wild area, even though it's again right next to the city. Yeah, this was a super satisfying build, for me at least. Hopefully you guys are enjoying seeing it come together. You can see me placing down some of those rocks that I mentioned, more procedural objects to sort of add some texture to this stream and to sort of break up kind of the consistent lines that you can see there. And the way these waterfalls work, they kind of have a little flare at the end of them, which sort of looks like a rapid. So I put down some rocks at the end of those just to look like the water was sort of flowing over these obstacles, which I thought was really cool looking, and I'm really happy with how that turned out. You can see I'm sinking some more of these really big rocks in, just so the tops of them are just poking out above the surface of the water. again, to kind of vary the width of the channel a little bit and make it look a little more realistic. Once I had some of these rocks in, I decided to place down, eventually you'll see I'll place down a few more shrubs and grass just to add some more natural like foliage to the area. Make this again look like a sort of wild scene, which is, yeah, you can see here I'm adding some of these smaller bushes in, smaller grass props, which again I think added a lot to this little area. Yeah, as I was saying, this was a super satisfying build for me. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it. If you're enjoying the video, or if you're just enjoying the series in general, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel and give the channel, the video, that is, a like, just so you can support me and see more of the series in the city as it continues to grow. Again, I really appreciate you guys watching it, and hopefully I'll continue to see you in future episodes. Now I'm adding some rocks kind of at the mouth of the river here, just again to sort of make things look a little more realistic. And yeah, adding this kind of cliff on this area kind of had this cool like sort of just contrast between the sort of manicured like waterfront on the rest of it, and then kind of this like rocky and kind of more wild looking area on this northern side of the lake. Yeah, that was a super important part of this for me. And the last thing I did was I added this pedestrian path going right up to the edge of this cliff, and I knew I wanted to have this kind of overlook area for people to access the waterfall. And I figured this would be like a really popular tourist attraction for people who are in the city. You can like access this just like you can like walk to it from the middle of the old city, which is really cool. And you can see I connected this path up to the gravel sort of walking trails that I had sort of laid out earlier. And down the line, you'll see that I'll add a walking tour right to the edge of this overlook, which is really cool. And it's cool to see people walking around and actually using it. It's always one of the most satisfying parts of the game for me. And just sort of, it brings these builds to life, which again is super, super cool to see. And yeah, just gonna move some of these trees out of the way. I stretched this node out at the end to kind of expand the viewing area so more people could access it. And yeah, this is the cinematic here. I'll show you sort of the before and after. Again, super happy with how this turned out. I think it's a great contrast to some of the other builds that I've done in the city so far. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Now I'm moving back to the other side of the lake, to the sort of more developed part of it. I knew I was gonna have like a major kind of like plaza type area on this side. But before I did that, I decided to add some grass and some bushes to the forest in this area just to sort of fill in some gaps and make it look a little more realistic. One of the tough things with sort of creating these forested areas in city skylines is real life forests aren't just the big trees. They have lots of grass and sort of shrubs in them, a lot of different sort of foliage with different heights. So it's kind of hard to replicate that without going crazy with the number of props, but I figured just adding a few things here and there would make it look a lot better. Yeah, you can see I'm sort of shifting these paths around. I use the pavement paths closer to the city, and they transition to gravel sort of further up the hillside and closer to the waterfall, which I thought made sense just in terms of consistency. Now I'm adding some benches to this path, and yeah, using the intersection marking tool, definitely super useful. I've talked about it a ton. To add these benches on this sort of paved path right on the breakwater with the lake, and then this path leads straight up to the elevated overlook area where you can see the waterfall from. Now I'm going to the actual plaza area that I talked about earlier, and I started out by just using Surface Painter to kind of map out an area where I was going to build. And I started out by placing down these tile decals, and at this point in the build, I was sort of not sure how this was going to turn out. It seemed like I had sort of left myself a huge space that I wasn't really sure how to fill. And you'll see, at the end of the day, I sort of like pushed the trees closer and closer to kind of constrain the area, just because I didn't want to have to fill a massive area with a ton of props that didn't make sense. But anyway, I put down these different tile decals, and I think these look pretty good. And I just copied them over and added some kind of invisible paths so it looks like people are actually walking through on these more like straight sections. And yeah, that's again, like before the people are actually walking through, it's hard to kind of see what you're doing it for, but once sort of the mechanics of the game kind of take effect and people are actually using these areas, super satisfying to watch, at least for me. Yeah, adding just some planters and some more trees, again, to kind of just fill space in this area. And it's tough to build places like this that are these kind of like wide open spaces, because in the game it's hard to place down all the different details and textures that are present in real life. So that's why adding trees and adding just kind of big space fillers like this is super useful. But yeah, as you can see, the trees kind of constrain the space a little bit more, which helped me out, made the build a little bit easier. And yeah, adding these fences to kind of like hem things in a little bit and kind of delineate this from the rest of the city was another helpful detail that I added. Now I'm adding a bike path through this area. I want the people to be able to bike through the park and not get in the way of pedestrians, but also not have to worry about any of the cars on some of the other roads. So adding that bike path was an important piece of connectivity. And I ended up downloading some of these concrete brushes, which are again super useful just to kind of create these sharp lines that aren't possible with the surface painter tool. And I also added a few more decals, like I've talked about before. Adding these kind of texture decals brings a ton of life to the area and sort of helps to break up some of the repetitiveness, especially when you're building kind of in a wide open space like this. Now I'm kind of changing the ground texture of the kind of promenade area, and you can see this area connected to sort of where it's right integrated with the sort of major high-rise, high-density area, which is super satisfying to see. And now you can see this area, which unfortunately I lost footage from, which I'm not sure how it happened. I apologize for that because it was a pretty cool build. I sort of added this little marina with a few small boats and a little sort of seafood restaurant type place where I can imagine you could rent some boats or and kind of just hang out, have a good time. This is kind of on the north side of the lake, on the other side of the waterfall. Again, apologies for losing that footage. It was a pretty cool build, but I didn't get to include in the episode, which was unfortunate. Now I'm adding some more fences, again, just to mark off where the edge of the park is. And this is the type of thing that, like, in real life, obviously this would be sort of a free, like, public resource, but in the game, I wanted to sort of get a sense of how many people were actually using it. So I added some gateless park entrances just to force people to go in certain areas just so I could see who was using the park and make sure that things are functioning properly in game, which again is not something I focus on all the time, but I do try to sort of play within the confines of that a little bit, even though obviously it's not perfect. I mean, you know, there's no money constraints, there's no taxes or anything like that, but I like to see the game working as it's supposed to, at least sometimes. The last part of the episode that I build here is sort of finishing out this kind of area where the metro line goes underground. This is sort of unrelated to the rest of the park, but it sort of will be a nice catalyst for moving on to some of the other builds down the line. This is going to be, or at least on the other side of this, is going to be sort of more of a sort of built-up area, a little bit denser. And yeah, that's kind of goes into what I'm planning on doing for the rest of the series, or the next couple episodes at least. Just building a ton in terms of like new neighborhoods, new buildings, adding some more functionality like schools and hospitals. So yeah, look out for that in future videos. Yeah, again, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment and a like on the video if you did. And yeah, subscribe to the channel to see more from the Vestanland series. I'm really excited with what's to come, and I'm really happy with how things have turned out so far. Yeah, so again, thanks so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Bye.